Okay, we're good to go, Mike. So welcome everybody to our e-learning network webinar. I'm delighted to introduce Mike Hruska, who is actually based over in the US. You're in Pennsylvania, Mike, are you?
I am.
Very welcome. So thanks for joining us. Okay, just before we get into the webinar itself, I just want to draw everybody's attention to the chat function. You should see that along the bottom of your screen. If you have the option to chat to panelists and attendees, please do so, and then everybody can see what you've written. If you would like to put in a specific question to Mike, then you can use the Q&A function. And Mike's already said he's happy to take questions as we go, rather than save them all up to the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Mike.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you having me. I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold, so if you see me mute, I might be sneaking a cough in here. I greatly apologize for that, but thanks so much for taking the time here to learn a little bit more and let me share with you about one of subjects I really enjoy, this space with education and technology. Let's see here. Joan, the slides are switching for you. Just want to make sure.
Yes, Mike, they are.
All right, fantastic. So today I want to talk about learning ecosystems. It's a term I hope that you're hearing more. I hope that maybe even you're using it more along the way. I want to unpack those a couple different ways in terms of technology, in terms of this thing that everyone's been talking about called the Experience API that might help us with interoperability. But also in terms of design and business case. I want to try to get you enough of the lay of the land around the challenges and opportunities with learning ecosystems that you can take a deeper dive. I have a ton of other information for you too that's extra that I'll make sure when I send my slides out finally here that you have access to additional articles, technical papers, research papers, and other information that will help you go and take a deeper dive in this area. All right, so just kind of a quick background. Where did I come from? I was a researcher at the National Institute of Standards and Technology here in the US. One of my other founders and I, and my brother, who's one of our founders, had worked in learning and education technology, saw an opportunity to extend the interoperability of what SCORM had produced in the marketplace, and really worked to build out the Experience API. We built a lot of learning products, do a lot of applied research, and some bespoke solutions in a lot of places. But let's get into what we're really here for today. If we think from a human-centered design perspective, we're really trying to provide support for people along the continuum on high-value learning journeys in our organizations. If we think about just the onboarding journey in an organization, it's quite a deep jump across the chasm, and we want to make sure that no one falls in and no one wants to fall in there either. So we have this process just to think about generally here. So this is just one metaphor that I want to share with you. And by the way, as Joan said, if you have questions or if you want to take a deeper dive on any of the areas, because we're going to cover a lot of territory in a short period of time, if you want to take a deeper dive, just throw something in the chat. But we have other journeys inside of our organizations that are also critically important. They might be high potentials in the development of that next generation of leaders. That might be first-time managers or other folks. And these are much harder journeys up the mountain of knowledge, skills, and acquisition of new behaviors and building. What we're really trying to do is, at the end of the day, enable as many people to have the opportunities or experience to build knowledge, skills, abilities towards behaviors to impact key performance indicators and produce organizational outcomes. But it's not necessarily easy. Couple of background questions, just thinking about what we're all trying to do in our organizations and what technology is trying to do at the same time. How can we use data about people, how they're learning and how they're performing, to see if we could possibly save time and money training personnel. And that could be less time or less content or something else. And then if we could collect the data, how might we use that to increase the effectiveness? So if I have you for 8 hours, can I still get you to that next level of capability in some ways? Couple sort of mega trends of interest here. People are getting deeper interest in adaptive learning systems. I often say that learning should be like GPS, knows where we're at, knows where we're going, and gets us there the best way possible. But that's not necessarily easy. Yes, the slides will be available afterwards, absolutely. As Viv just asked here. So, in terms of, I was reading a great industry M&A article last night. The amount of money being dumped into adaptive learning is growing very quickly. So everyone needs their own little something special. Experiential is key. We talk about the out of app experience. And if I'm building a mobile learning solution, I really want people to be able to practice it. I need to get them out of the app to embed that and try to get some transfer. And then, as we've all heard the meme, the 70-20-10 rule, and it sounds really good. How do we do it? What is there enough technology? What are the technologies to support these types of solutions? So when thinking about learning ecosystem concepts, whoops. Sorry, just fixing something here. So when thinking about learning ecosystems, I want to talk about just maybe a couple of the properties that are important. So we would need to be able to support people along learning paths. That means also giving them an opportunity to explore the world. And it would be really nice if everything kind of talked to each other in some way, if there was some level of interoperability. But we also have data at different grain sizes. If we think about the experiences or activities that an individual learner has, it might be the quiz level. This is what they answered on something, which may not be really useful data in the context of a big learning ecosystem all the time. It could be the fact that they attained this competency or were assessed on this knowledge, skill, ability, or the fact that they're performing at a certain level within a process. So really start to think about this idea of grain size. And then if we have a really robust system as far as capability and evolution level for an ecosystem, we could build some amazing forecasts and what if scenarios. And these things are happening now. They're just not ubiquitous through all organizations and ecosystems. I'm going to let you marinate and digest this just for a second while I grab a sip of coffee, and then I want to dive into why this is important to you. So I'm sure that many of you know the acronym SCORM when I say it. So for good chunk of this talk will be about the Experience API. For about the last 10 years, I've been working with the US government and stakeholder community on developing the xAPI with the idea that learning isn't just happening in the web per se, it's happening mobile and social and a wide variety of other things. And if we could capture the data exhaust from these other things, we might be able to do some really interesting things related to individuals, related to businesses and capability and produce a competitive advantage. The good news is now that many new technologies are emerging to support you building the learning ecosystem you need. I've been curating this with the group in industry and specifically Bill West from the eLearning Brothers. And this shows you the variety of different supporting technologies that are actually out there that could potentially fit into your learning ecosystem or a learning ecosystem that you're working in. Now, obviously, you don't need all of these, but the question is, which ones of these are relevant to your users? Which ones are you using today? Which ones do you need tomorrow? Now, as I said, the good news is there are many more of these popping up every day. The other good news is that there are many new players emerging that are producing interoperable solutions with the Experience API enabled. So now more than ever, you have the opportunity to stitch these together in maybe a lower cost manner than if you were trying to do or force all of the integrations on your own. Okay, so maybe in the poll or in the chat, if you guys wouldn't mind, maybe there's a better way for me to do this, but I just would love to see some chatter in the chat here. What is one technology that is on here that you think that you really want to do something with? And how about this? xAPI can be the answer, but I'd like to see what kinds of other things to think what people are thinking about generally. I like what Adam says here. Some LMSs claim to do all these things. Oh, Sandra, xAPI and AI. I agree. Fantastic. Oops. So I want to take a look because there are so many technologies that you might apply. I want to take a look at this model. I've been working with Phil Antonelli. Phil is with Xerox Business Systems, and this model allows you to unpack this concept of a learning ecosystem. I think because when we talk about this idea of a learning ecosystem, I think it's generally a bit overloaded. Oh, Adam, I like your question there. Is the key to have multi-tools rather than trying to fit into one vendor or system? Maybe, and that might be an approach. The idea, I think, is if we have an ecosystem, there's a number of different elements that can operate inside of it. It could all come out of one cereal box, as I would say, but you could get the best of breed elements that you want so long as you have the interoperability in this. So when unpacking the idea of a learning ecosystem, it's important to think about your foundation as your business strategy. Yes, Adam, because one can't surely do everything. Jack of all trades, master of none. Agreed. And the specialization that I'm seeing in job aid, performance support tools, and what we're going to see emerging with AI is going to continue to drive this. And you're right. Well, yes, user experience is important, and that's a good point there, Mark. So, on top of our business strategy is, can you guys see my screen? Someone says they can't.
Hi, Mike. It's the chat. Not everybody is seeing.
Okay.
There is an option. There's a drop-down option to chat to all panelists and attendees. And if you have that, that's the one you need to pick, because otherwise only Mike and I can see what you're writing.
Okay, so to jump back into this, our business strategy underlies this, but in reality, it's the organization of our people, how we build process, how we measure and analyze the content that is connected through technology. So what we looked at previously was each of these on this slide is really some type of technology, or in some cases technology and process combined together that serve as a lens to connect the people around some measurement, analytics, strategy, and experience through the technology. So it's kind of critically important to be able to understand each of these boxes and be able to connect the dots together. So I have some tools that I'd like to share with you today that'll help us to do that a little bit more. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what xAPI data is. So, my chat's in the way here, sorry. So xAPI data, you can almost think about it like printing a receipt. I know that that metaphor may not be that strong, but nonetheless, it is the whatever you want to be left over after a person's interaction with a system or a person's interaction with another person. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some grain size that to consider. And as we look at these sort of like micro examples, we can start to think about grain size. The format of an xAPI statement is in something called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, and it's essentially this format of who did what, and it allows for a lot of flexibility to be able to add in additional details. So you could have something as simple as Jill used the procedures for something performance support wise, but you can also have systems that also produce data. So, a plane landing too hard could be pushing out xAPI data. My phone could be pushing out xAPI data when I entered a certain geofence or region. Any type of system. We just previewed in Malta last week an IoT-based system that based upon sensors and threshold data for everything from gauges and temperature monitors will locate phones of the employees and push out emergency procedures or information related to that, and did that project in conjunction with Zebra Technology. So there's a ton of stuff that you can do in terms of like system and IoT implementation. Also, you can use xAPI data in deeper environments like simulators, and there are a number of ways to get much more descriptive with your xAPI data. So we might say something like, this pilot's completed the following task condition standards, flying at night at an altitude of X, Y, Z, and get a lot of extra, contextual data in there that could become part of that pilot's record of competency beyond just the checkbox at the end of the simulation. And then, another thing that I think is pretty important that might get overlooked is we have great assessment instruments inside of our organizations. How do we use the people the best way? Built a product a couple years ago that allows you to build a competency framework and then map measures into that and be able to grab that as an assessment and push it out to mobile. So if I'm a sales manager and I have 20 folks that sell for me in my pharma sales group, I can go do a ride along with those people and mark them red, yellow, green, yes, no, or use Likert scale or take video and audio and assess all 20 in one day. But then because a threshold condition is defined, I don't need to produce the remedial learning path. The system composes that remedial learning path and automatically pushes out to them. This nice little ROI play essentially for the salesperson, and gets learning to the moment of need as quickly as possible. Oh yes, Anthony, yes, you brought up something that's really critical here. Said something about pushing the sales data. So where performance is hard to map, it's really difficult to connect, learning, and it can be more difficult to connect learning and performance data. Where performance is easy, somewhere like sales, where the target's well defined. It's a really interesting place. I've done a few things in sales and a few things in marksmanship as well, which is another place that you're either hitting the target or beating it. And I think, Shara, you brought up something about privacy or whatever is left of it. That's pretty funny. I like it. Would it be okay, Shara, if we came back to that the privacy stuff. I think it's an important topic, and I want to be able to spend a minute or two on it, but I want to make sure that I get through the slides first. And unless you object, I'm going to move on to the next slide, if my computer will let me. So taking a look, essentially any learning experience on any type of digital device is theoretically capable of producing an xAPI statement, which goes to a learning record store, which an LRS, if you're not familiar, is basically a database or data structure that stores experience API data conformant to the specification. Why? Because now you have the ability to analyze it, visualize it, make recommendations, evaluate profiles, look at learning paths. So essentially this format is, I did this. Now there's other elements too. You can have context results and extensions. So when I was talking a few minutes ago about I flew this helicopter simulator under the following task conditions and standards, we could encode all that data and have some really rich descriptions, or we could have something really simple like I watched this video. Someone's talking about Learning Locker. Yes. So there's a number of LRSs that are out there. We built the open source one for the ADL program. The ADL open source one, there is Learning Locker. And then you have a number of other commercial LRSs out there. If you're playing around, you're setting up a pilot, it's pretty easy to set up any of them, really, whether it's commercial or whether it's open source. And I've got some links here for you for later for adopters. So without going too deep into the code, this is just kind of a quick look. I like what you're saying there, Adam. Okay, so just a kind of a quick look without going too deep into the code, but if they're technical, we'll dig deeper. So another thing I had researched since 2011, 10, time frame, both with the ADL and Pentagon and Army here in the US. But it's the Army stuff that we really took some deep dives and built and have produced a lot of papers around very complex implementations to very simple implementations of learning ecosystems. One of the key things that we found kind of across a different group of spaces is if we really wanted to connect learning and performance, we really needed to be able to encode competency along with something. So if you can think about just printing what we call like a minimum viable receipt, I watched this video and these were competencies that I experienced, and it would be really important if later we were trying to figure out which learning experiences contribute or had causality with what level of performance in some ways. So the idea, people are performing activities in our organization, and if we can understand those, whether they're learning activity or performance activity, understand them in terms of competencies, then we can understand the true impact of performance or results. We can get some visualization that supports us analytics in some ways, so that we can get an insight so we can know essentially what to do next, what to do more of or less of. So kind of zooming out here to the business side, towards the business side, there are some general use cases that when you think about, if you're really essentially instrumenting people's experience, digital and even people to people, what things could we see, what things could we know? So we have this live learning and performance view, so you can see and get the pulse of learning. That may be exciting, may be interesting, but you can also really get a better performance view. So imagine, the mission control for your organization view, where you see great graphs and tachometers and speedometers and things that give you a pure visualization of what does collaboration look like, what does workflow and throughput and capacity look like, and having that instrumented view. I say both learning and performance because I think at the end of the day, they're both driving one another. And certainly there are many things you can do for visualization and BI, but imagine having that BI around all of your learning and performance. And then being able to snap into views like, what are we ready to do depending upon what your domain is, or what is the competency of our organization, or what capabilities do we have or need. Another thing that becomes really important is looking at proficiency over time. I'm working with a couple different folks right now on training effectiveness evaluation strategies. They've said, we have a leadership training program and we've been doing it for a number of years, but we're not sure if it's working as well as it could. We need help to figure out how can this be evaluated and how can we understand its effectiveness and then increase its effectiveness. And that goes for individuals, that goes for groups, that might even go for a cohort a long period of time. And then, if you can always get the right people having the right conversation with the right person, there's some pretty amazing attachments that you could do for mentor and mentee mapping. There's a product out there called the Trek Learning Experience Manager. It allows you to build this mentor and mentee sort of relationship for coaching and cognitive apprenticeship. That's a longer subject, but there are use cases there, and that in that particular case, we supported an efficacy study, and this cognitive apprenticeship and adaptive learning solution doubled the rate that the users in this case were passing their certification exam. Then you have macro adaptation, and this is what I think the experiential and adaptive learning vectors that we talked about in the market earlier. This is important. I think this is a piece of it. Some people might say that micro adaptation or like more real-time intelligent tutoring is better, but I think the learning path thing is something critical. And then of course we have micro, but really thing that we want is we need enough data and enough data points at the right grain sizes that support some bit of trend analysis and give us insight, because we just really need to know what are we going to do next. So I'm going to talk maybe a little bit about design thinking. Is there anyone, if you can just type a Y in here, is there anyone that has heard of or used design thinking in their practice? Yes. All right, fantastic. Yes, that's a lot of yeses, I think. All right, well, the good news is I'm going to cover it very quickly. And the better news is I've got a couple tools that we love to use when thinking about their learning ecosystem. So design thinking, we're just trying to balance out what is possible with the technology, what the market or really the end users would love and people would be excited about, and then what's viable from a business model standpoint. Design thinking moves you through human-centered design and empathy with the end customer into a place where you can move very, very quickly and start to test ideas out. So we use a tool, and I'll explain it first, and then I'll share the next slide with you. So in order to understand these relationships between, whoops, we're looking back here. There we go. And in order to understand these relationships, this thing that I'm going to show you next is called the Learning Ecosystem Canvas. It's a design thinking tool that you can use to capture your current learning ecosystem and start to think through some of these technologies, some of the things related, some of the relationships between people and technology, and start to pick a few of these boxes and work inside those really to define where you're at. See how quickly I can get back there. So the Learning Ecosystem Canvas is um, a derivation of the Business Model Canvas. For those of you that already know, apologize, but Business Model Canvas is a 9-element model for designing business models. And it's very useful, and I could talk about that for half an hour, so I will focus on the Learning Ecosystem Canvas. At its core is something that's really important if you're going to have human-centered design approach. It's the value proposition. So, who am I delivering value to? And this might be, for our learners at Mike Company. We deliver engaging and it's inspiring learning consistently through blank, blank, blank. But this is where you really want to start to define that. Moving around the side here, what's the learner relationships? Like, how would we describe the work? How would people describe the learning? What words would they use? Because if they say boring and not in time, or just in time to be too late, or things like that about the learning, then what words do we want them to say? Next, moving around, learner segments. How do we think about our learners? Some organizations think about that journey differently. I like to think about the general passages that people are going through: onboarding, first-time executive manager, hypo development, technical business units. But there are a lot of different ways to do that. And the better you can understand those learning segments, the better you're enabled. The better you're enabled to determine which ones of those, if you support it right, will bring you the most end user value. Next thing, channels. And thinking about the learning ecosystem hexagon map. What are the channels that we're using to reach people today? What are the channels that we use tomorrow? One thing that's different than the business model canvas here is we just talk about value metrics. In a business model, beyond end user stuff, there's certainly the financial value metrics, but as L&D is typically thought of as a cost center and really should be thought about as a value center, but we wanted to define a way to talk about how that value proposition is being met. And so we use the value metrics section to define those. The left side is kind of like getting there, your people, your process, and where those things meet and connect to the business strategy. So here, essentially, we're looking at each of these lenses to understand the building blocks and the learning ecosystem stuff. I'm going to flip to this next slide because I think this is the one that will help you. We have an elicitation question framework that you could use. I was giving a webinar a few weeks ago and someone said, I'm at a 100-person company. Would this really even be useful to me? I would say yes. You might not have as a large one as a 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 person company, but this isn't important to go through. I've got a blog post on the eLN Interactions site about how to use this in a number of ways. It's been very useful over the last few years to use this as a way to help organizations kind of think about what are we doing, what do we want to do, what is worth doing. We want to make sure that we're not just doing a science fair project, that we are really building something that has organizational value. And that's why things like the value metrics are important in some ways. So this is one design thinking tool that we've been evolving and will continue to do so. I would love it if, and like I said, I will have URLs for you for all this stuff. I would love it if you found it useful, if you could tell me a bit more about that. This is a fun thing that you can do with your team in 45 minutes or 2 or 3 hours, but this is also the start of a whole set of other design thinking things that you can do to accelerate the future for you. If you haven't seen this before, this is also another design thinking tool that I really enjoy. This was developed by Bright Spot Strategy. and it's the employee experience canvas. If you really want to have a human-centered design, and there are a number of tools that you can use to do that, I like this one. I think that getting this additional context has a huge ability to accelerate the usefulness of the stuff that you're making. What is that? June, you're very fast. I think that's it, yes.
That certainly takes you to your site, Mike. I mean, people can maybe drop.
Oh, nope. I see the whole URL now. No, that's cool. I'll throw it in there. I just don't want to surf around while we're doing this.
Okay.
But yeah, my plan is to, as I'm adding a few other resources to this, send you all some of those. Let's see. So I could spend 20 minutes on the employee experience canvas. So I encourage you to check it out. All these things, the different design tools I'm showing you are all Creative Commons licensed. So follow the rules in open source land. So key questions, and I think these are also important because I'm zooming in and zooming out here with you. Sorry, Adam, I want to get your stuff. Would I use this pre-thinking about the ecosystem? Can you expand on that question, Adam? Oh, you mean the questions? Yes, these are great drivers I see here. So things that if you're a system, if you are your collective business strategy, technology, people, process management, and analytics. The system, you want your system, if you're thinking from that view now and not the human-centered view, but we want to be thinking about like things like, is this person ready to do their job? And what does ready look like? That having a rigorous understanding of competencies and behaviors and or is that different? And do you have to know? And then if not, what do they need to be ready to? So what the gap, skill gap, research, U.S. government marketplace, and massive amount of focus and time and effort is focused on closing the skill gaps. The question is, part of that is got to identify them if we're going to close them. So I think it's an emerging need that's going to continue to be there. And when we start to look at not just one person, but if we look at a group, what can we do to get them there? A colleague of mine just rolled out a large-scale diversity and inclusion D&I solution. I know an organization, things can be non-ubiquitous throughout the organization, so we need to know group by group, unit by unit, geography by geography, however we can slice the data. Are we doing the best that we can for this group of people? Are we really getting them there? And if not, how do we get them there? And then my favorite one is, who are my rock stars and what do they eat for breakfast? Who are the people that are the best at anything in an organization, and what makes them so good? It's not that we're cloning them, but if we can approximate their development, we could do some pretty amazing stuff. And then if we look at things like training effectiveness evaluation, or observational assessment, or if we're adapting learning paths, what does someone need to do more of or less of to get them to where they're being the best, essentially, that they can. But these are good things, and they're good for people, and it's good for a system to understand them. But at the end of the day, it needs to create value for the business. I was working with a retailer, and it took north of 80 days for their initial onboarding, and mobile pilot was done for a specific group, and that time was cut almost in half to get those folks moving. And this was just moving from LMS in the back room to mobile device out in the retail space, and having some engaging things that were in-app and out-of-app experiences. So that wasn't pushing the whole massive learning ecosystem effort out there. But thank you. That's my favorite one too, Luke. But getting this faster onboarding time is key. And you can create that upward momentum in the organization. It was a huge ROI opportunity for these folks. And then our machine, our organization as a machine, is made of people. If we can be constantly accelerating, allowing people these opportunities, we'll have less attrition. We'll have or longer retention. We'll have more capable people. We'll be able to take on more as an organization. So there's an opportunity for emerging collective intelligence in organizations by just allowing people and helping them develop better, faster. And allowing these upskilling opportunities. The good thing is our phone connects us to about anything all the time. The bad thing is there's a lot of noise that's coming to us. I'm sure that you get an insane amount of email. So how do we get to people at the right place and time and help them not just be pushed, but help them be excited to pull information? And then getting this next level of manager development's important. There's a ton of different metrics really that could be thought about, like from identification to growth and managing their knowledge and skill acquisition. But the question is, what's important to your organization? Do you not have enough managers? Can the managers be better as their first-time managers? And also leadership development. And really, like, who are those rock stars and what do they eat for breakfast? Who are the people that are just really excelling that we need to connect around in some ways? And then how are they connected? Looking at a project right now where someone's doing mapping of the collaboration and trust in the organization. So now you can see really the flow of what your value centers are, people that really look to each other for advice and validation, and see what that literally looks like, and then be able to map how you move those people into upskilling more often, up to first-time manager development, and accelerating those journeys as we talk about journeys. And then just helping people up the not just get across the glacier, but really climb up that mountain, and giving everyone high-value learning journeys. Did a project for the Army in a specific scenario where we adapted the learning path. This was training for an individual that was performed on a simulator, and then the person was put into a group. We used the data from adapting the individual training to do some group selection and scenario selection. So by adapting just the individual path and getting them to task a little faster, and by using that data to compose the groups, we were able to cut the amount of time by about 40% that the user needed in that team scenario to get to task. So by producing a little bit of adaptive learning on the individual side, and this will be in my pack I'm going to send out, we were able to affect the time by 40%, but we also use 60% less scenarios actually to get them to task. So there's some pretty amazing returns you can ultimately get to. So if you say, geez, this is pretty cool, that sounds like a lot of stuff, I'm not sure what to do next, I get it. I'm going to give you sort of a prescriptive approach here. So one, analyze and design what your learning ecosystem looks like. So you have the article on Learning Ecosystem Canvas that I will give you. You have the blank canvases themselves. You have elicitation questions. Just do it. Just kind of print it out, stick it on the wall, draw it on the whiteboard, analyze, and just start thinking about that. and define what it is. And it might be bigger than you think, and it might be smaller than you think. Next thing is you got to define that pilot in some way. So something that's testable, something that if someone did it, your boss would come in and high five you over that. Something that's going to have really discrete measures of success as well. So if I have a bunch more design thinking stuff, is that something that you guys would be interested in? If I get like 5 whys in the chat, I'll have a new packet of design thinking tools for learning that I'll send out beyond what I have in these slides. Yeah. Oh, 5 whys in a row. Nice there, Jason. I love it. Okay, cool. So it might take me till the end of the day for y'all, but I'll get you this other packet. Figure out your pilot, build it, define the measures, and then get your LRS. It's easy. If you can't do it, you will. And then you're going to have to use other tools in some ways. So it's not just saying we're going to get an LMS that does xAPI and then saying, look, we see all these completions for people, because you already have that information if you have an LRS. You got to find those business cases where you're using one or more channels, LRS, performance support, job aids, observational assessment, any of these other elements in a learning ecosystem, where you're using those to collect additional data that can demonstrate or provide insight into you solving a business problem, or driving one of those use cases, or driving one of these questions. So I have a bunch of articles in some different pubs about this. Most recent one here was out about last week, so that one's pretty new. But I will, as I said, I will send all this stuff out for you. There's something for everyone here, whether it's more technical or more business focused. I have been lucky to collaborate with. Whoops, I have a huge chat. Sorry. I've been lucky enough to collaborate and get some good funding from in the U.S. here, and what we try to do is publish papers that are applied research papers that if you want to take a deeper dive, whether it's adaptive learning or intelligent tutoring or building training effectiveness evaluation. We've got a number of different topics here, so I'll make sure this stuff is available to you as well. And then there's a bunch of places that you can find out more stuff. I got another collection of articles. There's a fun piece in TechCrunch about why LinkedIn should kill the resume and replace it with the experience graph or the experience API. There's some adopter lists out here, so who's making what and where is it, and can get it for free, which we love open source. It's really nice. And got some links to some of our work there, and recent. And I will add a few more of these for you. But there's an xAPI quick guide that some friends of ours put out that will make sure that you have a link to, and you can get a deeper dive. And if you have a specific question, I'm glad to answer. This is something we've been working on and really pushed in the government space and industry to get it moving, and now we're excited to see the market adopting it. Like SCORM back in the early 2000s, now Experience API is also signed in through some government procurement language, and oh, thank you. Yes. Good call, Joan. But Experience API was signed into the procurement side as well. So now we see a ton of RFPs, not just in the government space, but the commercial space, because the government's pushing on that innovation in some ways. So we have a few minutes here. And I'm totally glad to like dig deeper into questions or go back to a specific slide and look at it. I wanted to try to give you as much of the lay of the land as possible and some of the tools that are helpful. If you're thinking about doing stuff in this space, and you have questions, just let me know. I love to see stuff that's moving here. I feel like we're going back in time.
That's great, Mike. There was the question about privacy. Did you want to pick that up now? And then we can see if there's any other questions that come in.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the privacy stuff is has a couple elements to it. So there's the ownership of the data, and that's kind of the one that I'm really interested in. So Joan, do you if you're the employee and I'm the employer, do you own the data and I own the data and we both own the data? Who owns the data in your mind? This is where I get to ask you questions.
Well, funny you should ask. I've been updating some data privacy courses in the light of the new GDPR legislation that's coming into force next month in Europe. And that states that the data subject owns the data and has the right to know what you're doing with it, change it, update it, ask you to delete it, etc. So what you're doing as an organization is you're requesting permission to use that data. Now, if they're an employee in an organization, then I guess I don't know. I guess you still have to have obligations to protect their data, but I'm not sure you need permission to gather it for the likes of what they've learned, that kind of thing.
It's interesting. So if I just, thought about a really specific case of like, you attended this face-to-face training and watched these 3 videos, and you got your sales leader award badge. If you just looked at an example like that, as the employer, I would say, yes, that's your data. If I need to use it for something, I need to, obtain permission in some way. But as an end user, if you left my company, what of that information would you want to take with you? The fact that you had 8 hours of this face-to-face training, the fact that you watched these videos, or the fact that you got this badge and this is what this badge means, but maybe not. Maybe it's just evidenced and there's some assertions with it, but there's no, you can't drill down. So if I'm your new employer, you could transfer your badge to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, Viv, actually, Viv has just posted something in the chat saying he's recently written an article about that. So maybe we need to read that before we make a decision. Anthony says it's all right while you're still employed, but if you leave, it's probably a different matter.
Yeah, profile portability is, it's kind of, it's kind of interesting. Actually, if anyone's ever seen the product Degreed, my understanding, I knew it was in there. I think it's still in there. Their terms of service says that the end user owns the data, and if they leave, it's all their data, and it can kind of just follow them around in their system.
I mean, it's partly about knowing what's happening to the data. So with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, it didn't appear that, Facebook said they didn't even read the terms and conditions, so they didn't know what the company were going to do with the data. So you have to be transparent and say what you're going to do with it. But I think probably it's a separate discussion, and we're going off at a tangent here, because I think bringing us back to what you've been talking about, it's been really interesting. And what I particularly like about your session is the fact that it's very practical, and you've given us lots and lots of tools. So I do have a question about the slides, because normally we would send those out as a PDF, but you've got so many links in there. What are your thoughts? Could you maybe publish them on SlideShare, or do you think send the slides?
I think I can. I think the links will be clickable in a PDF.
In a PDF, okay. Fine.
Yeah, I'll make sure they are, because I normally end up with way too big of files because there's so many slides, and I'll just PDF them. Everything should be clickable on that, and I'll test that for you. And like I said, I have those. What I've done is take probably, I think maybe 10 of the best useful design thinking tools that we like to use when we're facilitating workshops or doing discovery. And I kind of packed those in with a little bit of instructions too. So it's really, you guys are getting to be experiment for going out to become game changer change makers for learning ecosystems.
I'm sure we don't mind. I've just launched the evaluation poll for those. I know some people have had to leave, and you'll appreciate, Mike, it's lunchtime here. But really just to know how useful you found Mike's content, and I can see straight away that you're getting the very useful vote, which is great. And then also we're just trawling for what people are keen on next for future webinars. Do you want to put up the final slide about what's coming up? Excuse me. So just while you're doing that, Mike, for anybody who's not a member of the eLearning Network, these webinars at the moment are open to anybody. But in future, we're probably going to make them, or make some of them, members only. It's only £29 to join for the whole year. And for that, you get to attend face-to-face events, such as the one coming up at the end of May in Brighton on cognitive psychology and learning design. So I'm looking forward to that, because Rebecca Gordon has spoken at our conference and such before. And then the next webinar, as it happens, you mentioned learning, what was it called? The Ben Betts HT2 Labs, Learning Locker. Ben spoke at an event we had in January on from the award winners of Learning Technologies Awards, and he's going to do our webinar in May, on the 25th of May. So we'll launch the sign up for that soon. It's not online yet, but it will be shortly. So we're out of time pretty much. I'm sure people would like me to thank you, Mike, on their behalf for what has been a great session. Challenging for some of us who are less technical, but really some of those questions about knowing your learners and knowing what you're doing and what the impact of what you're doing, it's just key, I think, to anybody working in learning and development. So I think we'll probably sign off now, unless, do you want to add anything, Mike?
No, thank you guys for having me. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this stuff. We love it, and love to see people doing cool stuff. So if you find anything useful, would love to know. If you're doing a crazy project, would love to hear about it. If you want to take on something that seems impossible, or you don't know if it's possible, that's kind of the edge that we like to play in. So feel free to reach out.
Do you want to put your email back up again?
Oh yeah, for sure.
There you go.
I'll make sure it's a link in that PDF, because it's not a link right now.
Right. Thank you very much then. We'll stop the recording and end the meeting there. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Have a great day.